Today I'll be taking a look at a poem from T.S. Eliot's 1920 collection, Aravos Prec. The poem in question is Mr. Eliot's Sunday Morning Service. It's about a Christian religious service, Sunday morning service, but I don't think at this time Eliot was religious, or certainly not a committed Christian. He seems to be more interested in the theological, philosophical aspects of what he's talking about, and looking at it all through a highly satirical, ironic lens. So I would also suggest that one of his main aims in this whole collection of poems is to write a new kind of poetry which is very musical and entertaining, and also has a meaning which might not always immediately strike the listener, might not always be obvious to the listener. And the fact that one is listening to something which one doesn't readily understand and just hearing these delightful rhymes the whole time with words which are probably unknown frequently to most of the people, that's a delight in itself. And I feel that's what he was trying to do, to create music in language by the use of words in English that are almost unknown frequently, and by so doing he makes you concentrate on the pure sound. It's almost like just delighting in the sounds of another language, or by not readily understanding the material, one concentrates only on the form of the words and how they go together and how they make rhyme and how they make a delightful sound. And that's what I think he was going for in this collection, to make a delightful sound. And the satire kind of adds an interesting and entertaining element which kind of increases the entertainment value, really. So I think we should get on with a reading of the poem here. So it begins with a quote from The Jew of Malta by Christopher Marlowe. Eliot had written an essay on Marlowe some time before, so yeah, he knew that period of Elizabethan drama extremely well. So here it's a Jew of Malta, and the quotation is, "Look, master, here comes two religious caterpillars." Now, it's certainly not very complimentary. We can sense the irony and contempt immediately. Two religious caterpillars. It seems like he's talking about pompous people walking very slowly, full of their own importance. The word caterpillar at this time, I believe also had significance of being rich. So they're rich when they shouldn't be as well. Not really helping anybody else; they're just helping themselves. So it gives us some kind of something to hang the poem on. It gives us some clue of what it might be about. So let's just read it and see what we think. So, Polyphiloprogenitive, the sapient sutlers of the Lord drift across the window panes. In the beginning was the Word. In the beginning was the Word. Superfetation of ta'en, and at the mensual turn of time produced enervate Origen. A painter of the Umbrian school, designed upon a gesso ground, the nimbus of the baptized God. The wilderness is cracked and browned, but through the water, pale and thin, still shine the unoffending feet, and there above the painter set, the Father and the Paraclete. The sable presbyters approach the avenue of penitence. The young are red and pustular, clutching piaculative pence. Under the penitential gates sustained by staring seraphim, where the souls of the devout burn invisible and dim. Along the garden wall, the bees with hairy bellies pass between the staminate and pistolate, blessed office of the epicene. Sweeney shifts from ham to ham, stirring the water in his bath. The masters of the subtle schools are controversial polymath. Well, it's quite a mouthful, isn't it? So that's why I really asked you to put your attention on just the sound of the words and the music of the words. And I think that's what Eliot wanted us to do to a large extent. You know, he was very knowledgeable about languages like Latin, Greek, Italian, the European Romance languages, and he had this delight in words, and he just wanted to put something together, I think, that where he felt the people were not thinking too much about the meaning, or they couldn't because they wouldn't understand most of the words, and they had to concentrate on the sound, the sheer musicality of the language, and how the vocabulary goes together in such an entertaining way. So he begins with a neologism, Polyphiloprogenitive. It seems to be like more or less 8 syllables to every line, a kind of iambic meter, kind of iambic tetrameter then, and the whole line is taken up with one word here, Polyphiloprogenitive. We'll think about the meaning after we finish the stanza. So, Polyphiloprogenitive, the sapient sutlers of the Lord drift across the window panes. In the beginning was the word. So, Polyphiloprogenitive is a neologism created by Eliot, puts together certain parts of words into one new one. So, poly, many, and lover of, philoprogenitive, so somebody who loves creating offspring, something like that. But it's not physical offspring, it seems to be intellectual offspring, so people who love to create new ideas. Polyphiloprogenitive, the sapient sutlers of the Lord, the knowledgeable sutlers are people who arranged everything in army camps. So somebody knowledgeable people of the church who are creating these new ideas, I suppose, to make sure everything is as it should be in the church camp. They drift across the window panes, so the kind of religious personnel inside the church drifting across the window panes, and then he moves to his point. So in the beginning was the word, the first line from John's Gospel, the Logos, and then he repeats it as the first line of the next stanza. In the beginning was the word, superfetation of ta'en, and at the mensual turn of time produced enervate Origen. So superfetation is, not many people will know this, and I only know it through having looked it up when I read the poem, but it means the second fertilization of an egg. So superfetation of ta'en. Ta'en is the one. So the fertilization of an egg for the second time, and at the mensual turn of time produced enervate Origen. So yeah, the right time for fertilization, the mensual, he says. Not, it doesn't say menstrual, it says mensual turn of time. So produced, enervate, Origen. Okay, so the idea is that something is being fertilized when it wasn't necessary. It had already been fertilized, and now it's being fertilized a second time. And what does it produce? It produces enervate, Origen. We saw at the start with the word Polyphiloprogenitive, it was talking about the proliferation of ideas as progeny. And what he's saying here is that the one word of the Christian church, ta'en, is Greek, meaning the one. So superfetation of ta'en, second fertilization of the one. It means, and at the mensual turn of time produced enervate, Origen. So there is a second fertilization of the word that has produced something that is unnecessary, and the unnecessary person, and one of those who did it is Origen, an early church theologian who created a huge commentary on John's Gospel, which is thought to be unreadable, really, these days. And he basically made the one idea of John's Gospel, the Logos, the idea of the one, the Logos, incomprehensible. He was supposed to be explaining it, and instead he made it more difficult to understand than ever. So that's where that comes in. So this process produced obfuscation, confusion. People who were supposed to be explaining and commenting on the gospel actually made it more difficult to understand by creating lots of unnecessary new ideas. Okay, so let's move on. He changes tack a little bit now. So a painter of the Umbrian school designed upon a gesso ground the nimbus of the baptized God. The wilderness is cracked and browned, but through the water, pale and thin, still shine the unoffending feet. And there above the painter set the Father and the Paraclete. Seems to be a reference to Renaissance painting by Piero della Francesca, which Eliot probably would have seen in the National Gallery. And it's about the baptism of Jesus, and you can see John baptizing Jesus, and above them is the Father and the Holy Spirit. And perhaps he's suggesting that it's quite a simple picture, really, which has been unnecessarily made more complex by all these figures he was talking about earlier. Now he gets back to the picture of the religious caterpillars who are drifting across the window panes, the ones who delight in all this obfuscation, the ones who are so happy to make everything more complicated than it needs to be. So the sable presbyters approach the avenue of penitence. The young are red and pustular, clutching piaculative pence. Under the penitential gates, sustained by stirring seraphim, where the souls of the devout burn invisible and dim. So, yeah, talking about these religious figures who are just delighting in obfuscation and making something that should be quite simple more complex than it needs to be, or if it isn't simple, the ideas and commentaries don't actually explain but make it even more incomprehensible. and there's a rather unflattering view of them as red and pustular, so full of pimples and spots and things on their skin. Maybe they don't get the sun very much, they're just inside thinking of insane ideas all the time. And then he moves to what's going on outside the church. Along the garden wall, the bees with hairy bellies pass between the staminate and pistillate blessed office of the epicene. So outside, the bees are getting their honey and pollinating the flowers. So that's the way the flowers pollinate, isn't it? The bees move the pollen between the female and the male, and it's a trade-off. They are fertilized, and so can reproduce, and the bees get their honey. So it's kind of ironic and sarcastic and sardonic, satirical kind of picture of what's going on outside as a reflection of what's going on inside, something that's basically, and in terms of the world of ideas of the church, it's something that's basically impotent, not reproducing, or reproducing at a distance, and it's really a satirical comment on the emptiness of all these ideas which have proliferated and have just made everything more difficult. The final stanza. Sweeney shifts from ham to ham, stirring the water in his bath. The masters of the subtle schools are controversial. Polymath. So Sweeney was Eliot's everyman figure. He features in several of his poems, and often not in a very complimentary way. The ordinary man who just doesn't think about things like this. He's just watching the television and going to sporting events and gambling and doing ordinary things that everyday people do. And it's a bit strange that he should suddenly switch to him at the end, but the point seems to be something like this guy couldn't care less. The people, ordinary people who they say they represent, who the church say they represent, couldn't care less about all this argumentation and all this commentary and all these futile ideas. These are the people that they really need to convince, and they certainly won't be able to do that. So just like Jesus was baptized by John, there's a reference to Sweeney in his bath. So yeah, the power of water to change things, but here it's ironic. He's in his bath, nothing's changing really, nothing's happening except he's washing himself, and he couldn't care less about all these multifarious polyphiloprogenitive ideas that the church has about the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost, Jesus, and all the rest of it. So yeah, just emphasizing the distance between these church figures with all these ideas and the people they're supposed to represent. And then it just finishes with a reference to these religious guys who are making everything more complex than it needs to be. Masters of the subtle schools are controversial. Polymath know-it-alls, the people who know everything. So yeah, the emphasis of the poem is definitely ironic, satirical, And somebody suggested that Eliot himself comes across as like rejoicing in these kind of disputes. So although he thinks he's criticizing them from the point of view of them making everything more complicated than is necessary, he himself is part of the debate because he is in his element too, explaining why these ideas are wrong and are too complex for what they're trying to do. So he's part of the debate too. He's part of the discussion. He's part of the discourse too, and all this creation of neologisms and strange, almost unknown vocabulary a lot of the time really puts Eliot with or in the world of those people who are debating these minute points. And so changing things around to picture of Sweeney at the end also is a dig at Eliot himself. He is making a dig at himself. So Sweeney couldn't care less about the subtle schools, all the different ideas about the Logos, and he couldn't care less about Eliot's criticism of them either. It's all the same to him, just mumbo jumbo that he doesn't understand and couldn't care less about. So the thrust of the poem is basically satirical, ironic. It's not religious. It's philosophical, perhaps, in the sense that a philosopher is showing off his knowledge and criticizing theologians, but that's about it. So this is the early Eliot before his religious conversion, and he's just really getting his fun by attacking everybody, and even himself too. And like I said to begin with, I think that the main emphasis here is on the musicality of the language. He's delighting in his own intellectual superiority, really, or his superior knowledge and ability to put these words together in an entertaining way that gives pleasure and musicality. Just delighting in the sound of the words themselves. I feel that is the most important thing, which might seem strange after all the interpretation I've given. So I hope that's useful, and thanks for listening.